Welcome back, movie lovers. We, of course, are delighted to have you with us today. I'm Brandon, and I'm not sure where... never mind. Here she comes now. This wonderful individual is...
Oh, hi, Brandon. Yeah,
Hey.
I'm Leia.
Hey, Leia.
Hey, Brandon.
What's
But-
going on?
Hey,
Did you hire Happy too again?
No.
Oh, yeah.
What the heck is going on?
Come on into Happy's bar.
I saw him out there when I arrived this morning. To answer your question, no.
Just grand
This isn't my
opening.
doing this time. I think after we unhired him, he seems to have bought the place across the street.
Is that a Twilight Zone themed bar?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
I mean, I'm annoyed, but I kind of want to check it out.
Yeah, you're not alone. I'm kind of really feeling that attitude. It just seems intriguing. Most people on the street seem to be walking past
Unlock this
him.
door with the key of imagination.
What do you think? Maybe after our lobby meeting, we go check it out?
Yeah, maybe. Bury the hatchet, as they say.
Of course, right.
Who knows? It could be fun.
It could be, yeah. Or he could bury the hatchet on a different level in our backs.
Yeah, well, there's that.
Crossed over
Let's have a little fun. Like, live a little,
Yeah.
you know?
You know,
Some spontaneous social adventures. I know how
Yeah.
much you love
oh,
those.
I'm terrible with everything spontaneous and social.
with Happy too.
Join me.
Yeah, okay, let's go. But first, we've got an episode full of sights and sounds, a dimension of mind, an episode filled with things and ideas. So, dear lobby friends and Leia, let's cross over into...
The Twilight Zone.
Come on, really?
Did you ever watch The Twilight Zone?
Twilight Zone, the movie. A little sci-fi horror dramedy-ish comedy kind of thing, all in one anthology movie from 1983. As everyone who is aware of Twilight Zone knows, saying too much can kind of spoil the whole damn thing. The fun lies in the twists.
The twist at the
twists.
end. Yes.
Yes. So we don't want to give away twists against people's wills.
Yeah.
So, hey, if you've not seen this movie and you like the idea of Twilight Zone stories, some of them you may recognize because almost all of them are based on previous Twilight Zone episodes. We're not going to spoil them for you against your will. So get out now, watch the movie, come on back.
Now do you realize you'll never get out of here? You think it was an accident you came here? He made it happen. He brought you here, just like he brought us here, and kept us here. Just the way he'll keep you here.
An anthology in 4.5-ish parts.
A portmanteau movie.
We ride along in a car on a road dark with shadow and substance. From the Twilight Zone intro, I just kind of snuck that in there. With two enthusiastic karaoke singers just straight out jamming to Creedence and their Midnight Special.
That's good.
Let the midnight. I think your tape. Oh Jesus! Got eaten. Jesus, that was good. Yeah.
After a cassette tape mishap, the music stops and conversation must take over for our road trippers. Casual conversation leads to a theme song guessing game.
Hey, wait. So if anybody is young, they may not understand, but the tape gets eaten in the tape player.
Yes.
You guys remember cassette tapes, or do you know what a cassette tape is? Because it had like actual tape inside of it.
Yeah, magnetic
And
tape.
It got stuck in there, and he just rips it out.
Yeah,
and
dude,
I
there's
would
ways
never
to
have done
save
that. I know. I was gonna say when he did that, I was like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
whoa!"
I remember if you were cautious enough, you could pull the tape out.
Yeah, rewind it.
Yeah, and as long as the tape itself wasn't like wrapped to
Broken.
hell around one of the spindles inside, you could still take a pencil
Yeah.
and wind that.
I even
little
taped them
bastard
together
back.
before.
Oh, sure.
When
yeah,
they
I can see
broke,
that.
I
Yeah,
just taped
absolutely.
it together. It didn't.
That's
It skipped over a piece.
sure,
But
but that's the whole idea behind cutting and splicing film. Too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway.
Well, yeah, when I saw that, I was a little outraged. Anyway, so the Creedence has been destroyed. We're left with this TV theme song guessing game.
Want to play TV theme songs? Sure. You know how to play that?
We don't know where the car is going, and we don't know why. All we know, in fact, all we need to know, is they're going somewhere, and the driver has a penchant for scary things.
Want to see something real scary? Sure. I love this. Okay.
But Before things get too scary, we're going to get out at the next corner and leave them to their journey. Up ahead, we arrive at a bar, and a sour-looking fellow walks in to meet some friends.
Mr. William Connor, who carries on his shoulder a chip the size of the national debt.
Saddled with family drama, like the in-laws are in town,
Ugh.
work issues, and seeming injustices against him, our misogynist, racist, bigoted, working-class asshole goes on a tear.
This is a sour man, a lonely man, who's tired of waiting for the breaks that come to others but never to him.
With the air in this bar entirely uncomfortable, and before we get involved in a barroom brawl, let's leave this guy to his nasty talk and...
He'll get what's coming to him.
Yeah.
Whose own blind hatred is about to catapult him into the darkest corner of the Twilight Zone.
Maybe some justice will happen after all, but let's take ourselves outside. Further down the road, reaching the quiet suburbs, we find ourselves in a quaint neighborhood. A bright, cozy-looking resting home, Sunnyvale.
The residents of Sunnyvale Rest Home, where hope is just a memory.
Greets us with a warm beam of optimism. Inside, the smiling elderly occupants reminisce of days of yore and youth. They speak of games and rhymes and glory days while smiling and pondering what has passed but has never gone from their fondest memories. Injecting a bit of imagination among the group, one man suggests the assemblage sneak out late at night and play a game of kick the can.
What did you play?
My game was kick the can.
Just, of course, to recapture that feeling of youth they all seem to be longing for. In fact, they'll do it tonight.
When do you think of playing, Mr. Blue? Tonight.
Most agree and anxiously await the sundown and lights out. As the emboldened residents get up to juvenile mischief and scoff at the community's rules.
Rules? Did rules ever stop a child?
No.
You gonna let rules stop you from the chance of being young again?
No.
Let's ourselves sneak out the nearest window and climb down the lattice to meet our next odd tale. Cruising down the road once again, we join Helen Foley en route to somewhere new, somewhere exciting and different.
Up until now, the pattern of her life has been one of unrelenting sameness, waiting for something different to happen.
We stop with her at a small diner. Inside, a young boy plays an arcade game, and strangely enough, it seems to react to the TV hung above and distorts the image with static occasionally, upsetting some of the more unkind and impatient patrons.
Walter, the kid is screwing up the TV.
Hey, it's his quarter. The TV's free, you know.
The adult, you should know better than bullying children abuser, pushes the child, sending the boy crashing into the table nearby as he falls to the floor. Then the man unplugs the video game cabinet in a fit of unbridled adult male rage. Feeling entirely over the nasty occurrence, Helen helps the boy up, and the pair walk out of the diner. Heading back on her journey, Helen now accidentally backs into the unfortunate child.
With her car.
And Leia, I hate to be laughing at this, but was that scene just not completely absurd of that child?
It
just
was.
Getting pummeled by that car.
Yeah, and then just getting up and brushing his pants off.
Like nothing happened.
Like nothing
right?
happened.
We find out Anthony is his name.
I'm Anthony.
Helen Foley.
I'm very glad to meet you, Helen.
The accident caused some minor bumps, but no real damage, thankfully.
Surprisingly.
Feeling sympathetic and appalled at what she did, Helen offers the boy a ride home. But I think maybe this time let's not hitch along with them on this particular ride, but we'll leave them to see what lies ahead. Instead, let's float high above the world and take a seat in the airplane soaring across the sky.
What you're looking at could be the end of a particularly terrifying nightmare. It isn't. It's the beginning.
Thankfully, well, hopefully, we don't need to use the restroom, as the captain has asked us first and foremost to stay in our seats and fasten our safety belts due to the storm and the turbulence, but also because there's a man currently occupying the lavatory, and he's having a breakdown of sorts. Rather manic.
Flames coming out of the engine, and then a flash, and then smoke.
Eventually, the flight attendants extricate the man from the washroom that he's barricaded himself in and guide him back to his seat as he continues to panic and spouts off crash data and statistics, forcing him to settle in. They do all they can to calm the stressed out passenger. as things quiet, minorly, John Valentine,
Introducing Mr. John Valentine, air traveler.
our freaked out flyer, opens his window shade and sees something.
Dun, dun, dun.
Something that causes him to freak out even more and causes more distress, and his worry amplifies and anxiety shoots through the roof.
There's a man on the wing of this plane!
Agitation builds to unbearable levels, and I don't know about you, but this flight isn't very comfortable anymore.
No, freaky flight.
I'd prefer to be back in the more level-headed company of our lobby friends, so I think that's where we're gonna go.
You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
All right, Leia, so we've kind of toured through
The different segment.
the different segments, the dimensions,
The dimensions,
if
if you will.
you will, that the Twilight Zone movie is going to be putting us through. So, as we journeyed through lands unfamiliar,
Mhm.
let's now get a little more familiar. Cast and crew, you think?
Absolutely, yeah. Let's go through the directors. Each part they directed.
Yeah.
The first director that we should talk about is John Landis.
Right, director and writer of the prologue and the first segment, right?
Prologue and the first segment. Something Scary and Timeout is what they've labeled them officially.
Correct, yep.
You know, he started out as a production assistant on Kelly's Heroes in 1969. And then he was also kind of an actor, a stuntman, and an extra for like a whole slew of Spanish, Italian spaghetti westerns for a while.
All right, good for him.
Which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's intriguing.
And then he came back to the U.S., and the first film that he directed was Schlock from 1973.
Lock.
I kind of low-key want to see this. The movie was actually completed in 1971, but it wasn't released until 1973 after it caught the attention of Johnny Carson. He's a fan of the film, and Carson invited Landis to The Tonight Show, and he showed clips of it to help promote it. Since then, Schlock has kind of gained a cult following, but Landis has described the film as, quote, terrible.
Ah, well.
So he's not a fan of it.
And John Landis, director of Animal House, one of my all-time favorites, The Blues Brothers.
Yes. Kentucky Fried Movie before Animal House.
Movie, yep.
An American Wolf in London.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty popular one.
Super classic.
I didn't know he did the Michael Jackson video or
oh yeah.
Yeah, that he did
music videos for
yeah, Thriller and Black and White.
Yeah. He's delved quite a bit into other territory.
Yeah.
But Trading Places, Coming to America, Beverly Hills Cop 3. Three Amigos. Yeah. So
he also did Master of Horrors, the TV show.
Yeah, he did.
Which I only bring up because I think there's a couple other people who have been involved in that as well.
Also.
So, yeah. John Landis also has a few movies that are in the Library of Congress.
Does he now?
Yes. He's got Animal House, Blues Brothers, and then the Thriller segment is actually in there as well.
Wow, I didn't realize that they preserved that even.
Yes, they preserved that even.
Cool. I think since we've still got so much to talk about, if we...
Yeah, and we'll touch on him again while we're talking about some of the movie facts. There's a little bit of drama there.
There's a lot of this is going to revolve around Landis.
Yeah.
Who directed segment 2?
Kick the Can, Steven Spielberg.
Right.
Which, you know, if you don't know who's Steven
Spielberg. If you don't know, I mean...
Jaws, E.T., Indiana Jones, Sugarland Express, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Hook, Saving Private Ryan, War of the Worlds. I mean, you could just go on and on.
You could go on and
on.
on.
There's so many more.
Spielberg was the executive producer as well. So he had a lot to do with the whole production, but this was his segment in particular.
This was his specific segment.
And, we should mention...
I was going to say, we should mention that the first segment actually is the only one that's not a remake of one of the Twilight TV show episodes.
Right.
That one was
original.
Completely. The prologue and the first part is all completely original.
In fact, the prologue and the first part were both written by John Landis.
They were both written by John Landis. Yeah. Steven Spielberg didn't write Kick the Can. It's remake from one of the shows, and it's literally the Kick the Can one. So it's almost an exact replica.
Yeah, there's a few different things that happen in the episode, but it's the same basic idea.
So Steven Spielberg is also the co-founder of Amblin Entertainment and DreamWorks. He did a short film called Amblin, which is actually the film that landed him a 7-year directing contract for Universal, which made him the youngest director to be signed to a long-term plan with a major Hollywood studio. He was roughly 21 years old.
Not bad.
So I think it's neat that he named his production company Amblin.
Studios.
It was almost like an homage to, where he got his great start.
What brought him up.
He also has 7 films, which are in the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress.
Not at all shocking.
Not at all shocking. We got Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, and Saving Private Ryan.
Those were the ones that I probably would have guessed also.
Yeah. He also wrote Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Goonies, and he's the creator of Medal of Honor, the Medal of Honor video games.
It's a far cry from his normal sort of work.
Yeah.
But that's
he
great.
actually is a big video gamer. He owns several consoles, but he's mostly into war shooters. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is why he created his own.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The Medal of Honor series is huge. So
yeah, no, it's a very, very common, very popular
I didn't
series.
know that he created that.
I had no idea.
Super cool.
And I tend to run in a lot of gaming series.
So lastly, the nurse in Kick the Can, her name is Priscilla Pointer.
Mm-hmm.
She actually lived to be over 100.
Yeah, she's the one who was the facilitator of the
the nurse or whatever is taking care of everybody, is actually his mother-in-law.
She was not his mother-in-law at the time of filming.
So yeah, that's all I got on Steven Spielberg. I mean, there's so much more.
So much more.
That's all we're going to touch on today.
We could devote a whole episode just to Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's move on to the next segment, which is It's a Good Life.
It's a Good Life.
Who directed that one?
Directed by Joe Dante, who actually, of this group, these are all great directors. Yeah. Joe Dante is one of my personal favorites out of his batch. I love his stuff. I'm a horror junkie by nature.
Yes, you are.
Everything horror is
Joe Dante.
So is Joe Dante. Everything horror is my jam. That's my whole reality.
Go-to. Absolutely.
But I do step out of horror now and again.
So one cute little fact about 12-year-old Joe Dante.
Oh, adorable Dante.
So he started writing horror film reviews for the magazine Monsters of Filmland when he was only 12. So cute.
I would like to read some of those reviews. I should have checked in on them.
I'm sure they're great. 12-year-old. Oh, that's so awesome.
I want to hear what that little
11
Dante has
now.
to say.
And I imagine the things he would say.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
He shot Hollywood Boulevard. That was one of his first films. Of course, he did Piranha.
Of course he did.
Which is like a really kind of a culty classic.
It is,
horror
for sure.
Film. Yeah,
It's
you see the cover and you're like, oh, yeah, I know what that is.
It's B schlocky. It's goofy horror.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea.
That's the whole idea. Schlocky.
Yeah.
The Howling. He did Gremlins. Explorers, which is a great classic 80s
love that little
bike riding film.
Sci-fi kids on bikes type
Kids
of film.
on bikes. Yep. The Burbs. Of course, he did Gremlins too. Mm-hmm. And then you said he had done Masters of Horror. He also did CSI New York.
Oh boy, there we go.
There it is.
Getting some CSI in there.
More recently, he did Hawaii Five-0 and Nightmare Cinema.
He also directed Inner Space, which is one of the super classic kind of sci-fi-ish.
And I don't think I've ever seen it.
No.
We
will have to remedy that.
It's got Martin Short in it.
Yeah.
Hello. So then it has Dennis Quaid in it too, who shrinks down to a little tiny size and goes inside of Martin Short.
Yes. Oh, what an odd movie.
I think we should move on to our last director, George Miller. He did Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which I have to say is my favorite segment in this one. I don't know why. Yes, I just love this one.
Well, Lithgow had a lot of fun with it.
Bruh. So good. Like, I loved watching him. I mean, that's kind of his, like, shtick anyway.
Oh, he is a classic overactor in a way that it's done with so much charisma and purpose.
Yeah.
That you can't help but watch him.
He had actually practiced all the lightning flashes and everything, like how he was going to react. And then when they did the film, they didn't happen when they did. And at first he was really pissed off about it. But then when he rewatched the films, he realized that not knowing when the lightning actually made him more authentic.
It actually jump scared him.
It actually jump scared him and made it more authentic. And it actually worked better that way. George Miller actually started out as a doctor.
Really?
He is a doctor. He even funded Mad Max as an ER doctor.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, he did Mad Max.
Yeah, Mad Max.
That's what he's well known for. Yeah, that's what he's well known for.
Fury Road and Furiosa as well, even.
Outside of the Mad Max trilogy or quadrilogy,
whatever
we're at now.
Yeah.
He's done Lorenzo's Oil, which got a lot of acclaim.
A lot of awards.
Happy Feet.
Happy Feet.
Also got a lot of acclaim. The Witches at Eastwick, which I love. He's done a lot of things that, you all probably heard of.
I mean, really, all the directors involved in this are very prolific.
Huge.
As poorly as this film did,
Yeah.
there's no reason it should have done as bad.
It was very entertaining from start to finish.
Yeah,
I
enjoyed it. And I wouldn't call myself a hardcore Twilight Zone fan. I do love the Twilight Zone series. Absolutely love and adore it. I'm not one of those hardcore, like...
ride or die.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I am too. Same.
So maybe that's why we perhaps enjoyed it more than the super Twilight Zone fanboys.
George has a twin named John. I just thought that was interesting.
That is pretty cool.
I think twins are cool.
Twins
so
are friggin' awesome.
Yeah. So, I always think in the back of my head, like, I wonder if there's ever a time where George just didn't want to be on set. And he's like,
just
bro,
called his brother in.
Can you just take over for me today? I can't do it today.
Just today. This one time.
Just this one time. And everyone's like, why is George acting so weird?
It's like he doesn't remember what happened yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm going to take just a brief little sidestep and talk about some of the writers that were involved on this. John Landis, writer for the prologue and the first segment.
Mm-hmm.
After that, we go into adaptations from previous Twilight Zone episodes.
Yeah.
So for Steven Spielberg's Kick the Can segment, it was based on an episode from the original Twilight Zone series, also called Kick the Can. And that story was written by George Clayton Johnson, better known for being the writer of the original Ocean's 11
from
story.
1960.
And it was adapted for this screenplay by
Richard Matheson and Melissa Matheson. They just happen to have, one's got an E and one's got an I in their name.
So she was credited under a pen name, a pseudonym, Josh Rogan. Yeah.
Why?
So she was kind of fresh off a major success with E.T.
Okay.
So I think to kind of still perhaps revel in that success, she went under a pseudonym to kind of differentiate her work.
Do you think it could have had something to do with what happened in this? The tragedy that happened in the film too?
Very potentially.
Yeah.
I don't know the specifics behind it, but that's
it's the only one she's got a pseudonym in. She used to be married to Harrison Ford for a really long time.
That was on segment 2, Kick the Can. Segment 3, again, it's a remake of another episode from the past. Also, this segment was called It's a Good Life. The original episode was called It's a Good Life. That was from a short story written by Jerome Bixby, which was adapted for this by Richard Matheson.
And Jerome Bixby wrote for the original Twilight Zone as well.
Yeah, quite a few entries even. And then segment 4, again, another remake of an original Twilight Zone episode called Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, both here and originally. That was written and based on an original writing by Richard Matheson.
Richard Matheson actually also wrote for Masters of Horror.
Did he now?
Yeah, there's another connection
that makes
to
a lot
Masters
of sense.
Of Horror. Yeah.
He seems to really have a great grasp of writing some fun short horror.
Yeah, I find a lot of the directors and writers kind of all are very intertwined in a network of sorts. They've done a lot of the same things. Once we start talking about the actors, The Simpsons comes into play quite heavily, and not just for one specific reason, but for a lot of different reasons. So, there's a lot of interconnectivity between a lot of the actors, the writers, the directors for this movie. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because, initially this film was written with the idea that the through line would be that at the end, some characters from each segment would all end up meeting up together.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting because you were just mentioning how this cast and crew is all kind of
intertwined.
linked and intertwined, and the story kind of does that. Well, initially
how Twilight Zone of you to bring that up, huh?
A dimension of sight and sound. All right, so there's a lot of people involved there. There's even more involved in this cast list.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into too much detail.
I think we'll just kind of mention a few of them and just move through it real quick. What do you think? All right, well, let's just start at the beginning and go chronologically through this movie, right?
Sure.
So in the prologue, only 2 people. This one's real quick and easy. Leia, who was in our prologue?
Dan Aykroyd and Albert Brooks.
Absolutely.
Dan Aykroyd was also in an episode of The Simpsons, and Albert Brooks was also in 9 episodes of The Simpsons.
Albert Brooks, frequent contributor to The Simpsons.
Just had to bring that up because, like I said, there's a Simpsons connection here, too.
Just kind of keeps on flowing.
Keeps going, yeah.
And, of course, Dan Aykroyd, you'd know him from Ghostbusters.
Second Stage City Troop in Toronto. That's where he got to start.
Albert Brooks, you would know him from Taxi Driver. He was that's kind of a side character in that one. And he also provided a voice for Finding Nemo as Nemo's daddy. Oh, one other quick call out here since it sort of fits in the prologue-ish. Burgess Meredith.
God, remember the Twilight Zone with Burgess Meredith? Remember, he loved to read, and there was a nuclear war, and he had no friends anyway, and he was down in the basement of the library. Yes!
Was our narrator
Yeah.
for this movie.
Mm-hmm. He was in the original.
Yeah.
I remember you mentioning that. You're like, wait.
Yeah, I was like, this is not Rod Serling.
Yeah.
So Burgess Meredith took over duties for Rod Serling, as of course Rod Serling had passed away before this film was made.
Long before.
You unlock this door with a key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension.
For those who may not know who Burgess Meredith is, if you are familiar with the Rocky movies, he was Mickey, the trainer for Rocky.
I don't think he lived very long after this film either.
I think he died
was pretty
a few
old
years
at
after
that point. Just another couple little tidbits here. Dan Aykroyd is married to but separated from a woman named Donna Dixon.
Mm-hmm.
Donna Dixon is actually in this movie as the junior stewardess in the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. They actually met on the TV series Dr. Detroit, which came out just the same year, but before Twilight Zone. He actually proposed to Donna Dixon on Fran Drescher's porch, and Drescher played a major role in getting them together from the start after they all starred in Dr. Detroit together.
Well, with that little fun with Dan Aykroyd, let's move on to segment 1, technically, called Time Out. And this one, I've really only listed on my end just one actor, because the rest are all very, very side characters by comparison.
Yeah.
The
Vic Morrow.
The main character, Bill Connor, he's played by Vic Morrow.
Mm-hmm.
And Vic Morrow, before this, would have been very well known for his time spent on a TV series called Combat! Exclamation point.
Oh, you said it right. Good.
Yeah,
good.
You have to say it loud.
Yeah.
1962 is when that ran for a couple seasons.
Yeah.
He was in 152 episodes.
Oh, yeah. So that was major for him.
That was his, he did a lot of other small bits here and there. But yeah, Vic Morrow, he's going to be covered a lot in this episode.
He will.
So
he's part of that tragedy.
We will kind of move on from there
to
segment 2, Kick the Can.
Scatman Crothers.
Scatman Crothers. Oh, I love that guy so much.
I do too.
Man, when I first saw him in this movie, I was like, oh, Scatman Crothers. I love him. I even called it out while we were sitting here.
You did, yeah.
But yeah, he's very well known for his time in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and The Shining.
The Shining.
Of course.
Hong Kong Phooey.
Yeah. He's so prolific, and when you see him, you just know him.
Yeah.
And he has that look about him that you just want to be his friend so bad.
Yeah.
I want to be his friend all day long, every day.
I love that he even got to sing a little bit in this.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of that, he got to sing a little bit.
Yeah.
I was like, oh.
Yeah, because he's quite the singer.
He is quite the singer. He's done a lot of animated stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of really cool animated stuff. Yeah. So he was in a cartoon called Paw Paws, probably not real politically correct these days, but it's about a bunch of bears that are dressed up as Native Americans. Yeah. It's kind of cringy, but he was in 21 episodes of that.
Yep.
He was in 33 episodes of The Transformers, 65 episodes of Chico and the Man. That was from 74 to 78.
Yeah, I remember a few episodes of that one.
Hong Kong Phooey was in 74. He was in 16 episodes of that. And then, of course, he was also in 22 episodes of the Harlem Globetrotters.
Of course he was.
From 70 to 71. He also reprised that role there was like a reboot of the Harlem Globetrotters cartoon. He reprised his role in that one as well.
That's cool. So yeah, he played Mr. Bloom in this segment.
Yes.
Kind of the main character in that segment, if you will. This is probably the segment I'm going to mention the most actors, just because I think it's astounding how many of them were so long-lived.
Yeah.
And I feel they need to be mentioned for that.
Sure.
Mrs. Weinstein, she was played by Selma Diamond. She was one of the few that lived just rather short by comparison. So she lived to be 64. She died in 1985. But she's absolutely worth mentioning because she was Bailiff Selma in the Night Court series.
Yeah, she was.
Next, I have listed Mrs. Dempsey. She was played by Helen Shaw. She lived to a ripe 100, Leia.
Holy macaroni.
That's phenomenal. She, had a few small bit parts in a lot of things, but she showed up in the movie Parenthood as Grandma. She was born in 1897. And then we have Mrs. Cox, who is played by Priscilla Pointer. Leia.
Yeah.
She's 100 years old and she's still kicking.
Still kicking, huh?
Yes. She's out there still making mischief, I'm sure. She was in Dallas, the TV series. She was in Blue Velvet, one of my favorite David Lynch films. And she was even in Nightmare on Elm Street 3 with previous Topic cast member Patricia Arquette. And then there's two other actors I want to mention real quick, just because I think they did such a phenomenal job in this. Young Mrs. Weinstein was played by Tanya Fenmore. So Tanya Fenmore is, I think, in her 40s-ish now, maybe near 50s, but she did such a good job as a young child playing the younger version of that character. I had to call it out because it was awesome.
I remember the night that my father died. We laid him out and sent all the children outside.
Tanya Fenmore didn't really go on to do a whole ton more of acting. She actually has gone on to make music, so she's much more of a musician now. Finally, I'm going to mention the actor who played the young Mrs. Dempsey. Her name is Laura Mooney, the most adorable little child in this movie.
She's the one who said, "Oh, then I'll never meet Jack Dempsey."
Yeah.
But Jack Dempsey isn't here. I'll never meet him.
When we first introduced to old Mrs. Dempsey, she's talking to Mr. Bloom about her husband, Jack Dempsey. And throughout the episode, she always refers to her husband as Jack Dempsey, not just Jack.
No, Jack
not
Dempsey.
Mr. Dempsey, Jack Dempsey. When she says,
My late husband, Jack Dempsey.
Not the fighter.
Oh, not the fighter. Not the fighter.
they kind of made a little joke of
Yeah.
it. Young Mrs. Dempsey was played by a actor called Laura Mooney.
Mm-hmm.
This was her very first role. Friggin' knocked it out the
She
park.
did.
And she's gone on to do a lot of voice work, and she's appeared in quite a number of like kids and teens programming as time went on. But okay, I just really felt all those people deserved a good call out. That was
Sure.
a fun little segment. All right, segment 3. It's a Good Life, Leia. You mentioned Nightmare at 20,000 Feet is your favorite of this bunch.
Yeah.
That one is, It's a Good Life is my personal favorite of this
Okay.
bunch.
Well, so that would be my second favorite because the practical effects in that one just blew my
good.
mind.
Loved
Yeah.
it. In this batch, I have a few actors to call out.
Okay.
But I figure we'll start with the person who played Helen Foley. Helen Foley being the main character, sort of one of two main characters in this. She was played by Kathleen Quinlan.
She was also CSI Crime Scene Investigations.
Yeah.
So
there we go. At least we got somebody who acted in a CSI. We got a director of a CSI episode and an actor in a CSI episode. But she was also in, Leia, here we go.
What?
Event Horizon.
Oh, was she?
Mm-hmm. One of my all-time favorite horror sci-fi mashup flicks.
Yeah.
Outside of Helen Foley, we have the character Anthony, who is our dual protagonist / antagonist almost, kind of. Anthony was played by a young lad called Jeremy Licht, and he didn't really go on to do a whole ton of things that are super notable, but he was in a TV series called Valerie from 1986 to 1991, where he played a character called Mark Hogan. I also have Uncle Walt that I have to mention, just because of everybody in this segment, he's probably the most notable just by appearance alone. He is played by an actor called Kevin McCarthy, who the first time I had ever seen him was in the movie UHF, where he was a phenomenal bad guy in that movie. Absolutely great. Just played disgusted and pompous and scummy upper management so friggin' well.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yep.
You know, UHF is one of those films a lot of people don't know.
Either don't
Weird
know
Al
or don't
Yankovic
remember.
and
it's one of
really
Weird Al's
good.
first movies, and it was so good.
It's a really good one, yeah. A lot of good one-liners in that one.
I want to go back and watch that one again. And then the final one that I have to mention is the character Ethel, played by Nancy Cartwright, which I think a lot of people would be familiar with her, not by sight.
No, because you never see her.
But by voice.
Yeah, so this is
Why,
another
Leia?
Simpsons connection, because she's the voice of Bart Simpson.
The voice of Bart Simpson. And the funny thing is while you're watching, you can absolutely hear twinges of Bart.
Yeah,
while she's talking.
got a weird voice, man.
It's great. I love it.
It's weird.
Maybe he'll get mad at you, like he did to his real sister, and cripple you and take away your mouth so you won't be able to yell at him anymore.
But that's what makes it work.
That's what makes it so perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's who I wanted to cover with It's a Good Life segment 3. Anyone else you want to call out on that one?
No, but I did want to head just back a little bit.
Oh, all right. Step us back.
Yes, just a little bit. We were talking about the first segment, Timeout, with Vic Morrow. And that was the only one we kind of covered with that one.
Yeah.
John Larroquette is in that
one that's right. He is,
as well. And I just wanted to mention it because there's a fun connection with John Larroquette.
Absolutely.
He's also a CSI New York and Law and Order Special Victims Unit, so I should mention that.
Okay.
But he and Selma Diamond actually starred in Night Court together.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then in the second segment of Kick the Can, the husband/wife characters, Mr. and Mrs. Weinstein, are played by Martin Garner and Selma Diamond. And like I think you had just mentioned, Selma was bailiff. On the show Night Court, the characters Bernie and Selma were actually casually dating during the second season. So lots of Night Court connections.
Night Court just kind of dripped right into this movie.
Dripped right in, yeah. I just wanted to bring that up because I'd forgotten that I had written some information down about that.
That's a great little connection. I guess that brings us to the final segment of the movie. But segment 4, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, with the character John Valentine as the main. John Lithgow, of course,
plays him.
Being the actor.
Yeah.
You would know him probably pretty well from things like Harry and the Hendersons.
Yeah.
Cliffhanger, where he played a phenomenal bad guy.
Yeah. You wouldn't know him from things like The Simpsons.
The Simpsons or Shrek.
Or the 1996 Star Wars Return of the Jedi, the original radio drama as Yoda.
Right. Yeah, these are things you would know his voice from, perhaps.
Maybe, yes. He's got a pretty distinct voice.
He does have a very distinct voice. And of course, a long stint on Third Rock from the Sun.
A long stint, yes. You know, I was never into that show, but I will say he was really good in it.
Oh, yeah, he was.
Anytime I ever watched an episode, great in it.
The whole cast, honestly, was really
great.
good.
Yeah, it's just one of them that I just never got into.
Never really
for no other reason than
I would watch an episode here or there, but it was never appointment TV for me.
Yeah, me either.
So really only one other person in this segment I want to call out personally.
Okay.
There's a passenger in the very beginning of the segment while John Valentine is having his bathroom freak out.
Yes.
There's 2 flight attendants who are trying to get him out of the bathroom.
Yeah.
And a little old lady kind of sneaks up, interjects, and she says,
"Is there something wrong?" No. Mr. Valentine?
"Is there something wrong?" And she happens to be holding a Twilight Zone magazine. Leia, do you happen to know the significance of this lady?
Yes, I absolutely do. She is Rod Serling's wife.
Yes, Carol Serling.
Yeah.
So cool. She's standing in there, obviously, because her husband couldn't be part of the production.
You know, we should probably talk about Rod Serling, huh?
I think we probably should.
Yeah.
I think this is a good time. We've kind of covered everybody that needs to be covered that you will see in this movie. But let's talk about the man behind pretty much all of it.
Yeah. I think he's an interesting guy. Politically, he aligns with a lot of the things that you know.
Yeah, very progressive.
Very progressive. He was known as the angry young man of Hollywood.
Which is great.
Yeah, he clashed with television executives and sponsors over a wide range of issues, including censorship, racism, and war. He was very forward-thinking when it came to gender roles. He often featured quick-thinking, resilient women. But yeah, and he was really into issues of racism as well.
Social justice, science.
There's an episode called I Am the Night, Color Me Black. Very blunt. And it's where hatred caused a dark cloud to form over a small town in American Midwest, and it spread across the world. But it was a kind of bring light to racism. He was very forward thinking for a man in the 50s.
Yeah, he used his show as a platform to really call out a lot of what he thought were injustices in society.
Yeah, and it was actually even before the 50s, wasn't it? Didn't he get, when was Twilight Zone started?
Twilight Zone was started in the 60s.
60s? Okay, so progressive for the 50s.
Yeah, I'm sure he had started writing, because he was a very prolific writer. So I'm certain he started his writing well before the 60s. And, you know, he's also done other things before that as well. So I'm certain his, outlooks and views.
He was 50 years old when he had his heart attack and died. He was said to have smoked 3 to 4 packs of cigarettes a day.
Yeah, I think that's where he got his very
smoker.
Distinctive voice.
Yeah, right?
Because when you listen to it, it's got sort of like a little gravelly
that'll
bit
do it.
to it. But yeah, very, very much known for his voice. All right, so Leia, did we cover our cast and crew?
I think we did.
I think this is probably the longest cast and crew segment we've ever done.
It is, but it's like 4 movies, almost 5 movies in one.
Yeah,
so there's a lot
to talk about.
Yeah, but let's move on to some of the acclaim.
Yeah,
for the
let's
film.
move right along.
So this film did 4.46 legs. So on a legs scale, did not do so great.
Yeah.
Domestic box office was 29,500,000. Opening weekend was 6.6 million. With a production budget of 10 million. It made its money back, but did okay opening weekend, and then it plummeted. John Lithgow did get a Saturn Award for Best Supporting Actor.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
And some recognition.
Yeah, some recognition. And it was nominated for Best Horror Film and Scatman Crothers for Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah,
so
he deserves that call out.
it had some nominations. And then the film also included 6 Oscar nominees. So we've got Dan Aykroyd, Albert Brooks, John Lithgow, Burgess Meredith, Kathleen Quinlan, and Kevin McCarthy.
Not to mention like Spielberg and everyone
Well,
else.
there's all
along those
that
lines,
too.
But
Yeah.
the reviews for this film, like you said, financials didn't do so well. Review-wise, this didn't do very well.
Yeah.
It got kind of torn apart by a lot of critics.
Yeah. Siskel and Ebert ended up rating each segment as a separate movie even.
They gave the first 2 segments not even, I think, a 2, possibly, or very low 2s out of, 5 they do? And then the final 2 segments were rated much higher. They enjoyed the final 2 better. But this was a movie that I think it hit people who were in love with nostalgia of the original series.
It's like doing Star Trek and then doing it wrong, you know?
Yeah. I think it hit them poorly, but it's more fondly remembered by those people who weren't as familiar with the original series. Because it still tells great stories, and they're still well done. It's just that it's that whole fanboyism where, hey, we like our stories the way they are, stop touching them.
Why'd you redo them?
Yeah, which is not my outlook on things. I think you can redo things and still make them different and engaging, and just let go of the nostalgia, man. Keep the nostalgia for the things you love, but understand
keep an open
that,
heart when it comes to the new stuff. Yeah.
Other stories can be told differently. It's quite okay. So anyway, Brandon rant done.
I'm ready to move on to the inspiration.
Okay, let's go into inspiration.
I actually only have 2 things about inspiration for this film. There's probably a lot of things that inspired this film. Not to mention the Twilight Zone was like the biggest inspiration because 3 of them were written after those episodes. Directly after those episodes. So segment 1, Timeout, is actually, like we had mentioned before, one of the only original ones that were written and directed. The rest of the segments were remakes from old Twilight episodes. But Timeout is still loosely based on the episode A Quality of Mercy from 1961 from the Twilight Zone TV series, which was about a World War II Army man who switched sides during the war. Right. So not exactly the same thing, but it was parallel. Yeah. And then segment 3 was your favorite one. It had like the practical effects and the crazy creatures.
I just have always loved that story.
Yeah,
since the first time I saw it in Twilight Zone, the original series, I loved that episode so much.
Yeah. So Rob Bottin was inspired by the Rocky and Bullwinkle segments, with Bullwinkle trying to pull a rabbit out of his hat, but ending up with a carnivorous animal for a rabbit. Joe Dante told him he was looking for something that was creepy, but not disgusting, like he had done with The Thing. Because he was in he did The Thing, you know. The guy who created those monsters pulled that inspiration from.
And that is a great monster. I love that.
That was one of my favorites.
So much. That's so good.
That's all I have for inspiration.
Okay. Really, for the most part, this all just kind of pulls back to the original episodes. And I think that is just the biggest reason this film just did not do so well. These are classic, super popular, super beloved Twilight Zone episodes that have been readapted. They've been colorized. Well, not colorized. They've been made in color.
Yeah.
Different actors, twists on the story that maybe people weren't familiar with that they just didn't.
Yeah, they're like, wait, that's not how it went when I watched it before.
Can't please everybody.
So we're running out of time. Let's get into the movie facts here.
Let's go over some of these, because these are what people are here for. Anyway.
Yeah. So the prologue. Something scary.
You want to see something really scary? You bet. Really? Yeah. Okay, this is really, really scary now.
So in the opening title sequence, Rob Serling actually can be seen reflected in the eye, like when you see the eye at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
He's supposed to be reflected in the eye.
There really isn't a whole lot to the prologue.
No, and actually we covered a couple of things I already had in my notes here at the...
kind of snuck them in there.
We snuck them in already,
So let's move on to segment 1.
Timeout. So this one was done by John Landis, as we had mentioned. It's like the only one not based on a TV episode of Twilight Zone. And it's all about racism.
Racism. Yep.
Yeah, it's just really very bluntly
on its
about
face.
racism.
Just that's what it is entirely. Yeah. Now this is the one segment that it was shot first, and it nearly tanked the whole production.
It nearly did.
There's a big controversy around it. Still to this day, it has caused a lot of reform in Hollywood. But before we get into the controversy, I've just got one thing to say of it outside of the controversy.
I've got a couple things too.
So I'm going to say my one thing, you can go through yours, and then we'll dig into that kind of beefy.
Yep.
So in this sequence, when the character Bill is in Vietnam, we see a bunch of American soldiers wandering through water. And one of them kind of mentions,
I told you guys we shouldn't have shot Lieutenant Niedermeyer.
Leia, you know where that's from, don't you? What it's referring to?
Yes.
Yes.
So in Animal House, the drill sergeant's name was Niedermeyer.
Yeah.
And they actually make mention in Animal House that he was shot by his own troop in war.
Animal House ends with a whole bunch of, I guess you could call them title cards or kind of screen captures.
Yeah.
And then each has a text of what these characters went on to do with their life.
Yeah.
Right? For Lieutenant Niedermeyer, as you had just said, his text states, Douglas C. Niedermeyer, 63, killed in Vietnam by his own troops.
Yeah, there you go. So there's a connection.
So there's a little
there.
connection. And
I think it's adorable.
The reason it's worth mentioning is John Landis, of course, writer, director of Animal House.
All right, so let's get into this controversy.
Yeah, let's kind of talk about this a little bit.
I feel like it's pretty important to the film, and it's an interesting piece of trivia. So there's a scene where Vic Morrow is in Vietnam, and you see him, being chased by the Viet Cong, and it's part of the whole racism thing.
He spends the entire episode running.
Running, basically. There's a scene in there that you won't see because, tragically, Vic Morrow and 2 children ended up dying in the scene.
Yeah, dying during filming, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's a scene where Vic Morrow and 2 children are fleeing from an American military helicopter, and a pyrotechnic canister misfired and sheared off the tail rotor of the helicopter. The vehicle started spinning out of control, and it crashed right on top of all 3 of the actors and decapitated 2 of them.
Yeah, Vic Morrow and one of the children.
One of the children were killed instantly. The subsequent court case against John Landis for criminal negligence went on for over a decade. I mean, it went on for a really, really long time. And the big reason that it was such a, not just because 3 people died, but there were issues around the use of child actors. He had them out at midnight in the dark with explosions. I mean, these are all things that are against union rules.
Yep, and they were being paid under the table.
So a lot of bad
practices
in place there. He and associate producer George Folsey Jr., production manager Dan Allingham, head of special effects Paul Stewart, and the helicopter pilot Dorsey Wingauis. They were all charged with involuntary manslaughter, and they were sued by Morrow's daughters, one of which is Jennifer Jason Leigh, and the other one's Carrie Morrow. Warner Brothers considered even dropping this segment from the movie altogether.
Right.
But then they decided to include it in an edited version, which worked really well, but, there's still a really bad pull on that film.
It's a very poignant segment because it calls out the racism and bigotry of the day and just how awful and terrible it is, obviously.
10 months after they were charged with manslaughter, they were actually acquitted of those charges, but the case of negligence went on for.
The segment itself was supposed to end quite differently. It was supposed to end with Bill Connor saving the 2 children.
Yeah.
All 3 of them were supposed to be transported back to the Nazi-occupied area, where the children would be taken away by the Nazis, and you would infer that they would be taken away to be executed. So sad ending there. And then Vic Morrow's character, Bill Connors, was still put back onto the train car, to be executed himself, obviously. But he was at least supposed to be shown having a change of perspective, a change of attitude.
Yeah, which was supposed to make him look a little more favorable.
Yeah.
It actually ended Landis's relationship with Steven Spielberg as well.
Yeah. A lot of people who called out John Landis for the negligence and wouldn't refuse to stand up for him because he was upset that a lot of other actors and actresses and crew members wouldn't come to his defense.
Including Eddie Murphy, of all people.
But a lot of them had said, look, man, that was completely wrong what you did. We're not going to back you on that. Sorry.
Yeah, and I don't blame him.
No, I don't
wouldn't either. He made a bad choice. Interestingly, Morrow insisted on having a $1 million life insurance policy before he shot any scenes involving a helicopter. He was very insistent on getting this policy. And when he was asked why he wanted it, he said he had always had a premonition he was going to die in a helicopter crash.
Which is so weird.
Isn't that weird?
That quote comes from when he was doing for Dirty Mary Crazy Larry, is when he had reportedly said that to a PA. And ever since then, he had always insisted on a life insurance policy when it comes to involving anything with helicopters.
One last little tiny thing, and this is bad taste on John Landis's part.
Okay.
During the 2010s, John Landis was an executive producer on movies titled Some Guy Who Kills People and I Hate Kids. Bad taste.
Maybe would have thought about those contracts a little bit better.
I mean, that's just me,
Yeah.
making
Hindsight
it bad taste,
makes
but
it look kind of shitty. With that kind of weird taste in our mouth, Leia, let's move on to another segment. Let's cleanse this palate. Then.
Yes, cleanse it.
Talk about some stuff. Do you have any information, any cool things to talk about with Kick the Can?
That we haven't talked about already?
Just
a couple things.
Okay.
Actually, just one big thing, and it's about Spielberg and the score. If you know Spielberg really well, you know most of his stuff is scored by John Williams.
Mm-hmm.
The only films besides Kick the Can, which was not by John Williams, were The Color Purple, Bridge of Spies, Ready Player One, and West Side Story. Those are all done by other composers. But that's not to say John Williams didn't have some pull in this one.
Oh, so he's got a hand somewhere.
His son, Joseph Williams, is actually the one who contributed the song Anesthesia for the film, which, great. It was really great music, by the way. Also, Jerry Williams, who's John's brother, was the percussionist on the score.
Huh. I'll be damned.
So,
all right.
Still within the Williams family.
The Williams
on
are
this
still
one.
putting some fingers in.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, for me, I didn't really find a whole lot that I needed to talk about with this.
That we hadn't already
covered. Just the long-lived cast I thought was just phenomenal. So I kind of mentioned them up above. But actually, I do have one more thing to talk about with Kick the Can. So initially, when this project was conceived, instead of Kick the Can, Spielberg was intending to adapt the classic Twilight Zone episode, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, instead making that the segment instead. After the tragedy on set, Spielberg decided to go and remove that segment and do Kick the Can instead. So Kick the Can is the only one of this bunch that's not explicitly horror, right?
Because he wanted to keep it light?
Keep it light. And you know, the other reason he didn't want to do The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street is because it would have required more filming at night and children on set.
Oh, and he didn't want to touch that with a
deal with any of that.
10-foot pole.
Which is too bad, because I do love the original Kick the Can episode, but I mentioned how segment 3 in this was my favorite of these 4 segments. The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street is my all-time favorite Twilight Zone episode. My
bummer.
absolute favorite Twilight Zone.
He probably would have done it justice, too.
If anyone would have, I bet that Spielberg would have done it well. So anyway, let's move on to It's a Good Life.
It's a Good Life. So it's a segment about what would happen if a small boy was given godlike powers, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the whole premise. There's a lot of practical effects in this film.
There sure is.
Yeah, so Gremlins has a lot of practical effects.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. And they're great practical effects. And you can really see like his vision in this as well. It transfers over.
Yeah, the segment is very Joe Dante from start to finish.
Absolutely it is, yeah. And of course, Nancy Cartwright, we talked about that. She's in this film.
Yeah.
She plays the quote-unquote sister.
Right, Ethel.
Really the sister. And then the large-scale puppets were all done by Rob Bottin, which I had spoken about earlier. He actually worked with Dante on The Howling.
Okay.
And then he was kind of the tour de force the previous year on John Carpenter's The Thing. So all those effects. I mean, you remember the scene in The Thing with the dog?
Yeah, do I ever?
I know.
Yeah,
after I started saying that, I'm like, duh.
Leia, I can remember almost every scene in that entire movie.
But that's what those monsters reminded me of, was that icky
twisted, gross dog.
Yeah, so good. Kathleen Quinlan, of course, we had talked about her earlier. Her character's name is Helen Foley. The name Helen Foley was actually not the original name of the character in It's a Good Life.
Right.
It was actually the original name of the character in the episode Nightmare as a Child from 1960. Helen Foley is actually the name of one of Rod Serling's favorite teachers as a kid.
And Helen Foley in this segment is a teacher.
Yeah.
Helen Foley, age 27. Occupation, school teacher.
I think she's a teacher in A Nightmare as a Child, too.
Yeah,
I thought that was a
pretty
sweet
awesome.
homage to your favorite teacher.
Yeah,
teachers are really important.
Teachers are especially good teachers.
Good teachers.
Yes.
Yeah, if you can remember a good teacher like that so many years later,
they
did a good
huge
job.
difference in children's lives.
Yeah. The last little bit of information I have, and I'm sure it looks like you might have.
I've actually got a lot.
Do you really?
Yeah, this is actually the segment I had the most stuff to talk about.
It's because you love it so much.
Right, probably.
Well, the only other piece that I wanted to mention was there's a red and white bicycle ridden by Anthony. It's a Kuwahara BMX bike. It's the same bike Elliot rides in E.T. It even has an E.T. sticker on it, which suggests it's an actual reference to E.T.
I wonder if he could jump across the moon with it.
Right? But that was a nice little homage.
That's a nice and sweet little touch there.
Yeah.
But it also kind of goes with the theme
of
how Anthony's very obsessed with pop culture.
Yeah, it's true.
I've got 2 kind of smaller things before I get into one kind of bigger theme overall for this segment. So the first one is another homage a little bit. In the diner, Helen Foley's talking with the restaurant employee, and he is giving her direction.
Oh, yes, that man.
He mentions...
Half-mile down the road is a gas station. That's Beaumont.
This is a reference to Charles Beaumont, who you may not know the name, but he is a man who was prolific for writing stories that were contributed to the original Twilight Zone series. In fact, he contributed the second most amount of stories to that series just behind Rod Serling. Like, just behind Rod Serling, like by a few episodes even.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a kind of a nod to a major contributor to that whole Twilight Zone legacy. That Helen is talking to that same restaurant worker, and he asks her,
"Where you from?"
Homewood.
Nice town.
Well, Homewood is a town from an original Twilight Zone series episode called Walking Distance.
Mm-hmm.
And then she mentions where she's going.
Where you headed?
Willoughby.
Which is another town referenced in a Twilight Zone episode called A Stop in Willoughby. The cook also mentions...
It looks like you missed a turn off at Cliffordville.
That is a reference to yet another Twilight Zone episode called Of Late I Think of Cliffordville. More little references back to the original Twilight Zone.
And why wouldn't you?
More little Easter egg love to the original series that brought this whole thing about. The next thing I have to say, which is another fun little connection, is in the original Twilight Zone series, the character Anthony, same character name, same situation, a child with godlike powers who's controlling a small segment and controlling the minds and behavior of people that he has chosen to almost imprison with him. So that child's name was Anthony. That child, at the time, in the 60s, was played by an actor called Bill Mumy. Bill Mumy appears in the diner scene as the guy who tries to talk down and restrain the child abuser.
Child abuser.
Okay. Hey, Charlie. Hey, come on, man. Take it easy. Take it easy.
So that is Bill Mumy appearing here, sort of not reprising his role as Anthony, but getting a touch in his legacy. The extra connection from that goes in the fact that there was a revival Twilight Zone series. In the revival series, there was an episode called It's Still a Good Life. Anthony Mumy's back again, playing his Anthony character, much older this time, and with a daughter who also has reality warping powers.
Oh, that's crazy.
So it's very cool. Cloris Leachman also reprises her role in that episode. Cloris Leachman in the original played the neighbor Agnes, so she plays a much older Agnes as well. All right, so the final thing I'm going to mention about this segment is a major through line of the whole ordeal. So if you watch the credits for the movie, you find that there are, I think it's 9 or 10 different animated shorts that are all given credit as appearing in this movie. All of them appear in this one particular segment, and they all very much inform what's happening on screen. There's an old short cartoon called Mouse Wreckers. The house, the exterior of the house that Anthony lives in, that Helen takes Anthony to and then gets subsequently trapped in, that house is very much not precisely designed after, but inspired by the house that appears in that cartoon short. Once Helen and Anthony go inside, there's cartoons being played at all times.
Old cartoons.
And the cartoons that are being played all directly inform what is also happening on the screen. So the next cartoon snippet that we see is from a old cartoon short called Feline Frame Up, and that is played just as Anthony's arriving home and greets the family members. They're all watching that little bit. The next episode, or the next cartoon short that we see, is a Betty Boop cartoon called Bimbo's Initiation, and this one is played as Anthony is taking Helen through a kind of a short tour of the house to find the restroom to clean up. And in that cartoon short, Bimbo the dog is kind of stuck in this odd building. It's like a Lovecraftian geometry, weird house inside. It's populated by cultists that are trying to get Bimbo to join their cult. And the hallways are twisty and turny. They're disorienting. They're filled with traps. And it's all black and white. So when they're going through the upstairs hallway, the hallway is entirely black and white. There's odd shadows and angles. Just is very unsettling and off-putting. Next, we see a segment from a cartoon called Feed the Kitty. And this is played while dinner is being made. And in the cartoon, you see a human woman who's wearing an apron. She's going to make dinner. And this happens while Anthony's quote-unquote mom is going off to make dinner.
He's wearing an apron and
Yeah.
making dinner.
And there's also, in that cartoon, there's a mouse hole in the wall directly next to the TV. And Leia, I believe you remember when we were watching, you said, hey, there's a mouse hole next to the TV. Yeah. At this part, while this segment is running, the entire house looks very cartoonish. Even the windows look like they're like cartoon colored with shading marks on them. So we're now getting into the whole world is now being informed by cartoons, right? Next, there's a cartoon short called The Power of Thought with Heckle and Jekyll, two crows that are very famous
Heckle and Jekyll
in cartoons. They mention,
we cartoon characters can have a wonderful life if we only take advantage of it.
And then there's another quote that says,
we can do anything we think of.
That is being displayed when Anthony himself is explaining to Helen, I just think about things and make them happen, where she starts to realize everything is weird here. After that, we have a cartoon short called Behind the Meatball. In this episode, there's a dog that's dreaming about meat, like big hunks of meat. And this is being shown while dinner is being delivered and eaten. This dog is hallucinating meat and food everywhere and not getting what he wants. And this is Anthony getting his dinner, which is exactly what he wants, but none of the other family members like the food, though they're eating it ravenously. So just sort of an odd little parallel there. I'm almost done, I promise.
Okay.
So next we have a cartoon short called It's Hummer Time, where a cat is trying to trap a hummingbird. While doing so, there's a dog. Of course, all the cartoons are always a cat versus a small animal with a dog punishing the cat for being a douche, right?
Yeah.
So
cats are inherently
nasty. At some point, this dog catches the cat and puts him in a chair and gives him a birthday party, sort of like a mocking birthday party.
Not happy birthday. No, not happy birthday.
Oh!
This is shown on the TV precisely when Helen, being mystified as to why everyone is so ravenously and disgustingly eating this food, all of a sudden comes to the realization and says,
Of course, it's a birthday supper.
You're just getting all the foods you like because it's your birthday.
So again, correlation between what's happening on TV and what's happening
He had mentioned earlier in the segment that it was his birthday.
Right.
Today's my birthday. They don't even care about that.
Next, we have another short called Case of the Missing Hair. This is where Bugs Bunny meets a stage magician called Alabama. This is going on screen when Helen is trying to storm out of the house. And Anthony says,
Please don't go. Uncle Locke's gonna do a trick.
It's the cartoon where the magician pulls a rabbit out of the hat, but instead of getting a rabbit, it's a lion. In this, he pulls a rabbit up, but it's that big, twisted, gross, deformed looking bunny,
rabbit.
Right? So this happens concurrently with that. Next, we have a sort of an odd little cult classic short that I had no recollection of at all, but it apparently had some popularity in the 70s called Quasi at the Quackadero. This happens kind of very briefly. I'm not familiar with it enough to really precisely pin it on this, but it is the only other cartoon in the credits that I couldn't explicitly place. So the only way I could figure out is to kind of place it here. So maybe I'm wrong on this particular connection. But this is played when Anthony wishes Ethel into Cartoon Land, or shortly before that, I should say. And Quasi at the Quackadero, I did actually watch it online. I found it on YouTube. And it is very odd and disjointed, sort of a weird little entry. So I could see it being used as a surreal place.
I thought I read that cartoon was made just for this movie. It wasn't?
There was another segment.
When she gets pulled into the cartoon, there's...
When she gets pulled into its
that's
original.
When it's original.
But I think just before that is the Quasi at the Quackadero segment. Finally, there is one more mention of a cartoon that, again, I didn't notice in the segment, but is credited as being there. The Great Piggy Bank Robbery starring Daffy Duck. He imagines himself as Duck Tracy. And
that's adorable.
It's one of the few cartoons where Daffy Duck is, and I watched this one as well. In fact, I remember we were researching and you watched over and said, hey, you watching classic cartoons over there?
Yeah.
What are you doing? I was actually watching this episode. And, most cartoons, when Daffy Duck imagines himself or pretends to be some other kind of classic or notable celebrity or character, he's usually pretty inept at what he's doing, right? In this case, in this one cartoon, he's actually really good at chasing down the criminals. So I thought that was interesting. But I couldn't find an exact place as to where this one appears in that segment, just that it was credited and must have shown up somewhere. I just didn't happen to see it. So Leia, I promise that's all I've got for this segment.
Okay.
I've talked way too long now. The next segment...
I mean, you haven't, but yeah.
Sure, I get you. I know what you mean. The next segment, I really only have one thing to mention for segment 4. I don't know if you have anything at all.
Yeah, I just had the one thing too.
Okay, maybe even possibly the same thing.
Probably.
Most likely. So, Leia, segment 4, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Go ahead and lay what you got on me.
Aside from this being one of my favorite ones, just because I liked the acting in this one, and it was exciting.
And the gremlin was really cool looking.
And the gremlins are really cool looking. I love practical effects. You know, I mentioned that so many times, but again, this has got some really good ones in it. Nancy Cartwright, she was in the one we just talked about.
Yeah.
The voice of Bart Simpson. She actually appeared in a parody of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet entitled Terror at 5.5 Feet. It's an episode in The Simpsons where Bart sees a gremlin on the side of the school bus. She also becomes Anthony in a parody of It's a Good Life 1961 in the Treehouse of Horror 2 from 1991.
When Bart takes the role of Anthony.
Yeah.
That's really a fun, cool connection.
Yeah, it's super cool. And when I got into this, I didn't realize there were going to be so many Simpsons connections.
Who would have thought?
Just because she's in it.
Just because Nancy Cartwright is Bart.
Yeah. And, you know, maybe that's the whole connection there because there's so many actors who've gone on to be in The Simpsons from this movie, too.
All right. Well, the only thing that I've got to say about Nightmare at 20,000 Feet is sort of a postscript, if you will. The segment ends with John Lithgow's John Valentine being put into an ambulance.
Yeah.
Where the whole movie comes together finally because we find Dan Aykroyd's unnamed passenger is now sitting as the driver of the ambulance. Now that John Valentine is kind of in a straitjacket, he's kind of in this stretcher and he's kind of murmuring to himself.
I'm practically a hero.
Dan Aykroyd from the front peeks behind and looks at the camera and essentially looking at John Valentine. And he goes,
Want to see something really scary?
Ambulance gets closed and they drive away. A fan had asked John Lithgow at, I don't remember if it was a convention or an autograph signing or something, but a fan had gotten a hold of John Lithgow and asked him, what did he believe personally was the ultimate fate of John Valentine? John Lithgow responded by saying, well, in my opinion, after Aykroyd says, want to see something really scary? I feel my character would have just said no.
Yeah.
And Dan Aykroyd, passenger driver, would have shrugged and just driven him to the hospital with no other consequence.
That's kind of funny.
Because, I mean, really, after everything that man went through on the airline, why would he ever say, yes, I want to see something really scary?
No.
I feel like he'd be over it by now. He'd be like, no, I just want to see rainbows and good things.
There is some speculation that he's actually in hell too. I read some speculation about how from the very get he was actually in hell the whole time. So that's an interesting concept too.
Yeah, it is.
That's enough of that noise, huh? Who needs it anyway? How about a little music?
Oh, Leia, I feel like we went through some odd doorways of imagination and spaces of shadow.
Come on in.
So, I'm not good at Rod Serling. That's not my forte. But we're back here in the lobby proper. Not that we ever really left, but this was a whole land of imagination. So we went away in our imaginations, and now we're back here grounded again. But I think we can finally safely end this episode.
There's still a chance that we might hit some potholes or whoops-a-daisies.
So what do you think? Call it a day?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of excited to go across the street and...
Right.
Sorry, not kids.
Remember? We talked about that. I know you're trying to get out of it, but I'm not going to let you forget.
He's been shouting the whole episode. It's hard to forget.
Yeah. Kind of think I need to go and check it out.
I think we should check it out. Maybe that'll shut him up for a bit. All right. Well, before we go over there and everyone else goes on their way, let's do the usual thing here. We'll ask everyone to please check us out at themovietheaterlobby.com. Send us an email over there at themovietheaterlobby@gmail.com. Check us out on the social media. Head on over to Blue Sky and find us at The Movie Lobby. Or I think you can even search The Movie Theater Lobby. It'll show up either way on Blue Sky. Oh, and on YouTube at The Movie Theater Lobby as well. Also, if you want to go ahead and find me, Brandon, you can find my page over on Blue Sky. I don't do a ton with it, but I'm there and I post stuff occasionally. Brand MC is how you find me. Leia, how does everyone find you?
Don't you go
So you can find me, Leia McCleavey, at LM Nerd Room on all of the previously mentioned socials, and at lmnerdroom@gmail.com.
So Leia, as we wrap things up here, after our multi-dimensional travel through the Twilight Zone, we already went kind of back in time, because 1983, that was quite a few years ago.
It was I was 3. That's 3 years old.
3 years old.
Yeah,
Tiny
just,
little Leia.
give you a... You guys can, figure out how old I am.
Can math that out.
Yeah, you can math that out yourself.
We're going to go back even a few more years.
We are, for the next film.
For the next one. So coming next week, we are going to talk about...
the 1975 British comedy film, Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
All right, folks, get excited for that one, because I think it's going to be a pretty decent one.
I'm excited.
Yeah, right on. And of course, Leia, as we always end, we end with thanking all of our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Thank
of
you.
our fellow movie lovers, everyone here in the lobby with us. And of course, Leia, I have to say thank you. Wouldn't be able to do this without you. It'd be really boring if I were doing it by my own.
It wouldn't be as fun, that's
Certainly
for sure.
not.
And I have to thank you as well, because I would not be able to pull this off without you.
So very welcome. Well, with that, let's get everyone out of here, Leia.
Hey, Brandon, you want to see something really scary?
You know, Leia, horror addict that I am, I think I do. But before I get to see something really scary, let's wish everyone adieu and say we'll see you next week on...
See you tomorrow, then.
The movie theater lobby.
Second day of grand
Bye-bye.
opening.
Bye.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.